Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm going to be giving you an in-depth discussion over my bar grounder tools. I get a lot of compliments over my bar grounding, and I get a lot of questions around these tools as well. So hopefully today I can answer some of those questions and help you improve your bar grounding. Bar grounders are just one of the many tool options out on the market that are considered back grounding tools. So for an example, if you just take a typical floral design that's been carved and tooled into leather and you identify those background areas, these are the tools that you would use to fill in those areas and highlight those areas. And the impression that these tools leave is kind of like a seed cluster. So if you look at a bar grounded background, all of those little seed clusters come from many different impressions or many different strikes of this specific tool leaving that look. And so unlike matted backgrounding tools or some of the other options out on the market where you're just simply flattening down or pushing down that background area, you have to be a little bit more precise and careful with bar grounders because of those seed clusters that they leave. You can overuse this tool if you're not careful and kind of give a really smushed, mashed down effect still with these. So they do take a little bit more precision, and I think that's why they can be a little bit intimidating when you're first starting out using them. It took me quite a while to get comfortable with these tools and a lot of trial and error, and so that's where most of my experience using these tools comes from. And so with that being said, most of the information I'm going to throw at you today is my personal take on bar grounders and bar grounding. I wouldn't say it's the correct or proper way to go about it. It may or may not fall in line with any written rules out there, but I have my personal preferences on how I enjoy using these tools and how I enjoy my backgrounds to look. And so today that's what I'm going to be talking about, is giving you my take on it. And as long as you end up enjoying using these tools and enjoy the backgrounding impressions that you get, I really think that's all that matters. You just need to enjoy what you're creating and enjoy the process behind it. And one more thing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the other backgrounding options out on the market. These are just my personal favorite. I love bar grounders. I love the way they look. All of those little seed clusters in the background just add that much more detail to your project. And when they're done properly and you have a clean bar grounded background, it just adds a very professional looking touch to a project. And it's very appealing to the eye. I think that's why there are so many people that are choosing to use these tools over some of the other options out there. So again, just keep that in mind. You can use whatever you want. These are just my personal favorite. That's enough rambling. Let's take a look at these tools. So as we look at these tools up close once again, you can see that I use Barry King bar grounders in the size 40 with the 5 seed and the 3 seed. Now what this first number 40 refers to is just the seed size itself, and that 5 and 3 refer to the amount of seeds that are on each tool. If my camera will focus on this, you can see this tool has 5 seeds and this has 3 seeds. It's not going to focus, but as we take a look at this Barry King catalog, you can see all the other options here. So these are what I have, the size 40, and as you can tell, as these numbers get smaller, the seed size gets smaller. And then you can also purchase a 7 and 9 seed tool. If you're doing small to medium type work, kind of like I've been showing throughout this video, then the 3 and 5 seed should work just fine. There's been a few times when I could probably use a 7 seed tool, like on this belt I'll show right here, for example. I bar grounded completely around this name, and a 7 seed would have definitely been handy, but there's rarely been ever times that I've just needed a 9 seed. I can generally make this 5 seed work just fine. When we talk about actually using these tools here in a little bit, I'll show you how I like to go about using it. If you're just starting out and you're trying to get used to bar grounding, I would say anywhere from a 30 to 40 would be a good place to start. These smaller numbers, like these 27s down here, you can see those are really intricate, small tools, and those are for very, very small, tiny, intricate work. And I think most of us out here are generally going to be in this area. The 40, it is a little bit big, and that's what I have, but that's just the way I like it. I like that look because it really does highlight all of these seeds in the background. I could probably step down to a 35 and be just fine. That's a little bit too small for me. I really like this 40 or this 35 size, but I have these 40, so that's what I primarily use. You can even, as we flip to the back of this, yeah, here it is. Wow, that was perfect. Here are some number 80 bar grounders. So they get really, really big. It really just depends on you, your style of work, and the look that you're going for. And if you don't know, you can see the price of these right now. Barry King, these are some of the higher quality tools that are out on the market. Barry King tools are. And so the price of these is $35 a piece. And that is a little bit higher, or significantly higher, than a lower quality, lesser expensive tool like this, which is just a craft tool. This is my old grounder, and I will talk about the difference and show you the difference between these tools when we talk about actually using them here in a little bit. But keep that in mind, you don't need these Berry King tools to create good work. However, in my opinion, they do leave a better impression and they are easier to get used to. So just, that's something to keep in mind. You don't need them if you're just kind of a hobby crafter, a hobby tooler, doing it for fun. Just keep that in mind. Before we continue on with the video, I do want to show you a quick comparison of my Berry King bar grounders compared to my craft tool bar grounders, which would just be something that you would typically find at Tandy. That's where I got this tool. And from my understanding and from what I have heard, back in the day, like many years ago, craft tool actually did create high quality tools. They used steel, they left great impressions, and if you can find older craft tools, then they do work well. However, a lot of the tools that craft tool makes today, they're just lower quality metals are used to create these tools, and when you compare that to these higher quality tools, which are made of, these particular tools made of stainless steel, that metal alone will leave a lot better impression and just help emphasize the details of this tool a lot better than these lower quality metals. Now, I am not an expert on all of this, so don't take what I say exactly for gospel. Do your own research, but that's how I understand it. So I just want to show you the difference in the impressions that these tools leave. Here are those impressions up close. The one on the right is the craft tool and the one on the left is the Berry King. There's nothing wrong with that craft tool impression. You can just tell that the Berry King left a lot more crisp impression. And just from the different sizes and options that you have with Berry King, in my opinion, they're just a lot better to learn on. And if you obviously want to get the better results, then that's the route to take. But again, like I said earlier, there is nothing wrong with that. That's just the difference that you're going to see in those impressions. And it's a lot easier to stay consistent with the Berry King tools. But go about it however you want. That's just my opinion. Okay, now let's talk about actually using these tools, which is why I'm sure most of you clicked on this video in the first place. And I do apologize in advance if any of this that I say is confusing. I'm not the best at articulating the way my brain comprehends this stuff, but I'm going to do my best. The first thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm sure most of you have heard me mention it before, is going to be design layout. So if you have somewhat of a trained eye and you can spot the background pieces on these designs that I've laid out, you can notice that I personally try to keep my backgrounds all similar in size, and they're usually somewhat of a triangular shape. And that's just because of the way that I like to use these bar grounders. But I'm keeping that in mind from the get-go. So when I start, I know not all of you create your own patterns, but for me personally, when I start putting pencil to leather or pencil to paper and I'm drawing these designs out, every little sticker or scroll that I add, I am trying to keep the background around that area in mind as well, because I want to think about how my tools are going to be used in that area and how I'm going to get the most benefit with my tools when I'm laying that out. Again, I'm sorry if that's confusing. That's just how my brain thinks about it. So if we look at this little simple belt pattern, you have your primary structures, which are going to be your flowers. Maybe you have some leaves, and then you have what I guess I would call your supporting structures, like your vine work, your scrolls, your little stickers. And then all of that extra space around it is what's going to be the background. And that's what I'm talking about. So like when I'm drawing this out with a pencil and I'm putting this little here and then branching off of that, I'm trying to keep that in mind and try to create somewhat of a triangle shape. And that'll make a little bit more sense in a little bit when I start talking about using these. But that's just what I keep in mind. And then if you look at this pattern, same thing. All of these background areas, I'll also talk about here in a minute of why this one is a lot further along than this pattern. But all of these background areas are somewhat of a triangle shape. So when you're laying out your designs, if you are at that step in your career or your journey with leathercraft, whatever you want to call it, and you're laying out your own patterns, just always try to keep little things like that in mind. How is my tool going to be able to fit and work best for me in this layout? Another thing that I personally always try to keep in mind is the moisture content as well. So when I am bar grounding, I like to bar ground kind of like I bevel. I want it to be on the drier side, not dry, but I don't like it to be just fully cased or drenched. I want it to be a little bit dry because it's a lot easier to control the impressions and control the results. You can get more consistent results when you're tooling on a little bit of the drier side. Again, not dry, but on the drier side. So for me, and when it comes to my workflow on a tooling design, it's generally going to be at the tail end when I've done all of my shading, all of my extra detail work, and then all that's left is decorative cuts and backgrounding, because that's when that piece is going to be a little bit drier, or it's going to be directly after I bevel, because beveling takes so long. You're generally, if you just kind of quick case your projects like I do, then generally when you get finished beveling, it's almost perfect moisture content to start your bar grounding. So I never keep it the same. I'd be lying if I said this is how I do it every single time, but I generally try to bar ground after I get finished beveling or at the tail end of the project. And again, that's just me personally. All of these tips are the way I like to go about it and how I get the best results and the most consistent results. I'm going to use this little scrap piece of leather to talk to you about actually striking the tool. Now, I always like to start with my largest tool and work my way down to the smaller tools. In this case, it's going to be my 5 seed bar grounder. And I'm going to try to start in a large area and cover as much area as I can with this tool before I switch to my 3 seed or my smaller tool and do any of the touch-up work or any of those tight spaces. But I like to start with this biggest one first. And something to keep in mind outside of the moisture content is you want to hit this tool with consistent pressure. You don't want to hit one impression super deep and then come over here and hit a really light impression, because you're not going to get consistent results. The burnish that the tool leaves is going to be inconsistent. So always try to strike this tool with consistent pressure, but don't hit it too hard. I've heard some people, and I've had some people ask me, my tool gets stuck in the leather. You're either tooling on too wet of leather or you're hitting that tool too hard. There is a sweet spot on a little bit thicker piece of leather. This is 9/10 ounce. You have a little bit of room to work with, but if you're tooling on 4/5, 5/6, something really thin, be very careful. You don't want to go through that leather. It kind of takes some feel and takes some time to figure out that sweet spot, but there is a sweet spot. Don't hit it too hard. Don't hit it too light. Just use your best judgment on that. These bar grounders are also meant to be a single strike tool. So what that means is you don't want to sit there and just continuously whack this tool over and over again. To really work it and get those consistent results, you want to just hit it one time and then move over and hit it again, because if you just kind of sit here and work it, that's when a screw up can happen. Again, just inconsistent results. So try to make sure that when you are striking this tool, you're just hitting it one time and then moving on. When I'm using this bar grounder, I like to keep the impressions as close together as I can as well. I don't like to see a big gap in between my background. It's not the end of the world. It's not a terrible look. I just try to keep them as close as I can as possible. So when I'm leaving my impressions, I try to make them really tight like that. If you have a little separation like that, it's fine. And sometimes it's necessary. And like I said, it's not the end of the world. But I try to keep my impressions as tight and as close as I can. Also with that, keep in mind you don't want to get too tight and then accidentally slip and crush some of your seeds or get them smushed really close together like that. So whatever you're comfortable with, again, it's all really just comes down to personal preference. And just taking a small piece of leather like this that you can mess around on and practice is a great way to get more comfortable with your tools and improve your results. You don't always have to sit down and carve a piece out and get a lot of time invested and then worry about screwing it up. Do your practice, prepare as best as you can, and just consistently get better at it over time. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you guys, and I apologize. I don't want this to be confusing. I just want to give you as much of my perspective on it as I can to hopefully help out. And so when we start to figure out how we want to place our tools in our backgrounds, just like I mentioned earlier, I'm generally going to try to find the largest area of the background. So looking at this particular background spot, this is the largest area, and then it kind of slowly tapers down to this skinny spot. And it might not always necessarily be the largest area, but it's where I feel like I can be most efficient placing this tool, covering a lot of that area and still covering a large amount of area while I can continuously work it through that background, slowly fanning it and twisting this tool to fill that area, if that makes sense. And on that same note, whenever you place a tool and strike it in a background area, you want to make sure that you are keeping that direction of the tool. You don't want to make a strike coming across like this and then start turning your tool and making different impressions like this. You don't have to necessarily make sure that every one of your strikes in every background piece is the same, but in each specific backgrounding piece, you do want to make sure that you're keeping your tool relatively close to the same direction. You're obviously going to have to fan it and work it to fit in that background area, but you don't want to go halfway up and then turn and start getting all these different crooked lines. You want to try to keep it all consistent. So as you can see, I started right here at the base, and then I just slowly started working my way up into that tighter spot. And if you look here at the bottom, I didn't completely fill up that background spot, and not every spot's going to be perfect where you completely fill it up, but this is where this might be debatable with some people. I personally don't have an issue coming in here and just overlapping, because with these size 40s, they're big enough you can kind of feel when those seeds that you left the impression in the leather interlock back in with the tool, and you can kind of go back and slowly and very carefully fill that in without worrying about getting too crazy and screwing it up. You don't want to, I mean, it probably would have made a little bit more sense to just go ahead and take this 3 seed and come in here to be a little bit more careful about it. It really just comes down to whatever you're most comfortable with, but I don't have a problem with overlapping. You might get a little screw up like this right here, but again, that's not the end of the world. It's not ideal, but it's not always going to be perfect. So just however you want to do it, however you're most comfortable about doing it. But I personally, a lot of times, if I have a little open space like that, I'll just go ahead and overlap it and make it work. This spot right here, this background area, is kind of one of those awkward spots I mentioned. You don't have to do it exactly like this, however you want to do it. You know, I might not even do it exactly like this every single time, but and then I'll probably skip through this little skinny part. And then a little bit later on, you can come back through here with your 3 seed. And do any of the touching up that you need to do. Another thing worth talking about is, just like I mentioned a second ago, it's not always going to be perfect. You might have a little screw up where you interfere with your vine work and it just doesn't look just picture perfect or clean right there. Another thing you can do to kind of touch that up and fix it is you can go back over it with your beveler slightly on the edge of that where your original bevel line was, and just ever so slightly kind of touch that up and clean it up a little bit. That way you don't see the bar grounding impression on your flower petals or your vine structure. It's not a perfect solution, but it does help. And then once you get to a little area like this where if you start squeezing it and making it in, you know for sure you're going to interfere with the main elements instead of just being in the background. That's when you don't necessarily have to do it right that moment, so you're not just switching your tools back and forth a lot. So just for time purposes, you could go back later with your 3 seed and touch that up, or you can do it right then and there, just whatever you want. But kind of mess that up. It's not always going to be perfect. Keep that in mind. It's handmade. It's a craft. It's not machine made. We're not going to be perfect. You just want to do the best you can. And no matter who you are, how good you think you are, it's almost inevitably going to happen to everybody. You're going to have some small imperfections, some small pieces of overlap like this. We try to minimize that as best as we can, but it just does happen. You can take a deep dive look at anybody's work and pick it apart if you'd like. I'm not going to lie, I don't know if I just have too much caffeine in me today or what. I've been a little bit nervous tooling on camera today for some reason. So I had quite a few more screw ups than I would like to admit, but I'm putting it all out there. Like I said, you could take a deep dive look at anybody's work and pick it apart if you wanted. You do your best to get the majority of it looking as best as you can. Just know there's going to be some imperfections. That's part of it. And like I always say, these tools they're just that, they're tools. Some of them have specific purposes, but you can use your imagination a lot of times too. It doesn't just have to be an enclosed background area that you use this tool in. You can take it outside of a structure like this to just kind of highlight this as the edge of this design, if it's kind of an open area like this. I don't usually do that, but I see some people kind of do that. That's probably not very pretty as far as I'm just not used to doing that, but you can do things like that as well with it. And so here are both of these little designs with all of the backgrounds bar grounded and filled in. And that's going to be a wrap on this one, you guys. I am genuinely sorry at the length of this video. I had zero intention of dragging it out and making this a 20-30 minute long video, however long it ends up being. As I was going throughout the process, there was just more and more information coming to me that I thought would actually benefit you guys if I threw it in there. I didn't want to confuse any of you, and I know I was rambling a lot, but I just wanted to help you guys as best as I could. I know these tools can be intimidating to use. They can be aggravating to figure out. So if I could just throw one piece of information in there to help you take that next step up the ladder, then that's all I want to do. I just really want to help you guys out and answer some of the questions that you have been reaching out to me. A lot of you guys trust me to make these videos, and I am by no means ever intentionally try to steer any of you guys in the wrong direction. Everything that I'm showing you is what I do in my shop every day, and it's how I produce the work that I do. But thank you guys for watching. Again, if you got some benefit from that, then go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. And if you would, consider subscribing to the channel if you got some benefit from this, if you enjoyed watching it, or if you want to see similar content like this. We're almost to 10,000 subscribers, and that was one of my big goals for 2024, was to hit 10,000 subscribers before the year's up, and we're almost there. So it'd mean a lot if you consider subscribing to the channel. If you stuck around till this point in the video, you're a real one. I appreciate you guys, but until next time, we'll see you.